The security alarm shattered the silence at Kensington Palace at exactly 2:47 in the morning. Red lights flashed through the corridors as guards rushed toward the royal vault. Someone had broken in. Someone who knew exactly where to go. When the guards arrived, they found a young man frozen in the beam of their flashlights. His hands were covered in dust. His backpack was open, and inside it, wrapped carefully in cloth, were 3 of Princess Catherine's most precious sapphire gems. Pieces worn by royalty for generations. The young man didn't run. He didn't fight. He simply stood there, his face pale, his eyes filled with something that looked almost like relief, as if he'd been waiting to be caught. His name was Thomas Hartley. 26 years old? A museum restoration specialist with no criminal record. Clean background. Respected in his field. There was no reason for him to be there. No reason for him to throw his life away for 3 pieces of jewelry he could never sell. But when the police searched his apartment, they found something that changed everything. Hidden in a wooden box beneath his bed was an old military medal, tarnished with age, engraved with a name, Captain James Hartley, Royal Guard, 1943. Thomas Hartley wasn't just a thief. He was the great-grandson of a man who had once sworn to protect the royal family with his life. The news spread like wildfire. The media called it betrayal. A stain on a proud family legacy. How could the descendant of a decorated royal guard steal from the very family his ancestor had served? Before we continue with what happened next, if you're enjoying this story, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss how this ends. Trust me, Thomas was held in custody while investigators tried to piece together why he did it. He refused to speak. Refused a lawyer at first. Just sat in the interrogation room staring at his hands. Prince William was informed immediately. As the future king, any breach of royal security fell under his attention. But this case was different. This wasn't just about stolen gems. It was about history. About honor. About a family name that had once meant something. William requested to see the files on Captain James Hartley. What he found surprised him. Captain Hartley had served during World War II. He had been part of the team that protected the royal family during the bombings of London. He had even saved the life of a young Princess Elizabeth, the future Queen. When a bomb struck near Buckingham Palace in 1940, the captain had been a hero. His name was written in the records with respect and gratitude. So why would his great-grandson destroy that legacy? William made an unusual decision. He wanted to meet Thomas Hartley face to face. Palace advisors warned against it. Security teams said it was unnecessary. But William insisted. There was something about this case that didn't add up. The meeting was arranged for the following morning. In a private room, away from cameras and press, just 2 men. One born into royalty. One born into the shadow of a hero. When Thomas was brought into the room, his hands were cuffed. His eyes were red from lack of sleep. But when he saw Prince William sitting across from him, something shifted in his expression. Not fear, not shame. Something deeper. William dismissed the guards. They hesitated, but obeyed. The door closed. And for the first time since his arrest, Thomas Hartley began to speak. What he said in that room would change everything. Asterisk. Thomas looked at Prince William with exhausted eyes. His voice was quiet, but steady. I wasn't trying to steal them, Your Highness. I was trying to return them. William frowned. Return them? Those gems have been in the royal collection for decades. They've never been missing. Thomas shook his head slowly. That's what everyone thinks. But it's not true. Took a breath, as if gathering courage. My great-grandfather took them. In 1944, the night before he died, the room went silent. William leaned forward. Explain. Thomas told him a story that had haunted his family for 3 generations. Captain James Hartley had been on duty the night of a bombing raid near Windsor Castle. The explosion was close. Too close. Part of the castle was damaged. In the chaos, some of the royal belongings were moved to safety. James was ordered to help transport valuables to a secure location, jewelry, paintings, items that needed protection. But during the transport, something happened. The truck he was in was hit, not directly, but close enough to throw everything into confusion. When James woke up in the medical tent hours later, he found something in his coat pocket. 3 sapphire gems. Wrapped in a handkerchief, he had no memory of putting them there. No idea how they ended up with him. He panicked. He knew how it would look. A royal guard found with stolen royal property. It didn't matter that he had no memory of taking them. It didn't matter that he had been unconscious. No one would believe him, so he made a choice. He hid them. He planned to return them once things calmed down, once he could find a way to explain. But he never got the chance. 2 days later, he died from internal injuries caused by the blast. He was only 31 years old. Thomas's voice cracked slightly. He died with that secret. And he passed it on to my great-grandmother in his final letter. He told her where he hid them. He told her what happened. And he begged her to find a way to return them to the royal family. William listened, his expression unreadable. So why didn't she? She tried, Thomas said. But she was terrified. She was a widow with 2 young children. If she came forward, people would think her husband was a thief. His name would be destroyed. His military honors would be taken away. She couldn't do that to him. So she kept the secret. And it passed to my grandmother, then to my father, and finally to me. Thomas looked down at his cuffed hands. I grew up hearing stories about Captain James Hartley, about how brave he was, how loyal, how much he loved serving the crown. But I also grew up knowing what he carried with him when he died, and it felt like a weight on all of us. He met William's eyes. I became a restoration specialist because I wanted to be close to history, to understand it, to preserve it. And for years, I kept those gems hidden, just like everyone before me. But last month something changed. William waited. My father died, Thomas said quietly. Cancer. In his final days, he made me promise something. He said, don't let this follow you like it followed me. Find a way to make it right. Give them back. Let our family name be clean again. Thomas's voice grew stronger. So I studied the palace security. I learned the layout. I found a way in. I know how it looks. I know it seems like I was stealing, but I was putting them back. I was trying to return them to where they belonged. I didn't know how else to do it. He paused. I thought if I could just put them back in the vault, quietly, it would be over. The debt would be paid. No one would have to know. Captain Hartley's name would stay clean, and my family could finally be free. William sat back in his chair. His mind was racing. This wasn't a story of greed. It wasn't a story of betrayal. It was a story of honor. A family trying to correct a mistake that had haunted them for 80 years. But the law was clear. Thomas had broken into royal property. He had accessed a secure vault without permission. Regardless of his intentions, he had committed a crime. William stood. Wait here. He left the room and spoke to his advisors. The debate was intense. Some wanted Thomas prosecuted to the full extent of the law. Others argued for leniency given the circumstances. But the final decision rested with William. He returned to the room 20 minutes later. Thomas looked up, fear written across his face. This was the moment that would decide his future. William sat down and spoke carefully. What you did was illegal. You understand that? Thomas nodded. Yes, Your Highness. And there are consequences for breaking the law. Even with good intentions, I understand. William was quiet for a moment. Then he said something no one expected. I want to verify your story, William said. If what you're telling me is true, there will be records. Proof, and I need to see it before I make my decision. Thomas felt a wave of relief and terror at the same time. Everything is in my apartment. The letter my great-grandfather wrote. The original handkerchief. Documents from the war. It's all there. Within 2 hours, a team had retrieved the items. They were brought to the palace and laid out carefully on a table. William examined each piece. The letter was old, written in faded ink on thin paper. The handwriting was shaky, the words of a dying man. It described exactly what Thomas had said. The confusion. the fear, the desperate wish to make things right. There was also a small photograph. Captain James Hartley in his uniform, standing outside Buckingham Palace. Young, proud, a man who believed in duty and honor. William held the photograph for a long time. He thought about his own great-grandmother, Queen Elizabeth, who Captain Hartley had helped protect during the war. He thought about legacy, about the weight of history, about how one moment can define a family for generations. He called in a historian from the Royal Archives. "I need you to check something. In 1944, during the bombing raids, were there any reports of missing sapphires? Anything about jewelry being unaccounted for?" The historian disappeared into the archives. Hours passed. Thomas waited in a holding room, not knowing what would happen next. His future hung in the balance of documents that may or may not exist. Finally, the historian returned. In his hands was a file marked confidential -1944. He looked shaken. "Your Highness," he said carefully, "there was a report. It was never made public. 3 sapphire gems were noted as missing after the bombing raid near Windsor, but the matter was closed without investigation. The assumption was that they were destroyed in the blast or lost in the chaos." William's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes shifted. "So they were missing?" "Yes, sir. The inventory from that night confirms it." William turned to his chief advisor. "Bring Thomas back in." When Thomas entered the room again, he looked even more exhausted than before. But there was hope in his eyes. A desperate, fragile hope. William gestured to the documents. "Your story checks out. The gems were reported missing. Your great-grandfather's letter is authentic. Everything you've told me appears to be true." Thomas let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. But William wasn't finished. "However, you still committed a crime. You broke into royal property. You bypassed security systems. You accessed areas you had no authorization to enter. These are serious offenses." Thomas nodded. "Die. And I'm ready to accept whatever punishment you decide." William walked to the window, looking out over the palace grounds. He was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "My great-grandmother, Queen Elizabeth, knew Captain Hartley. He was part of her security detail during the war. I've read reports about him. He was described as one of the most loyal and dedicated guards they had. He loved this family. He would have given his life for them." He turned back to Thomas. "And in a way, he did. He carried the weight of those missing gems to his grave. He died believing he had failed in his duty, even though the failure wasn't his fault." Thomas's eyes filled with tears, but he didn't look away. "Your great-grandfather was a hero," William continued. "He saved lives. He served with honor. And what happened that night was an accident in the chaos of war. He didn't steal those gems. He was trying to protect them." William picked up the photograph of Captain Hartley. "But for 80 years, your family has lived with shame, with a secret that poisoned everything. And you risked your freedom and your future to correct something that happened before you were born." He set the photograph down gently. "That takes courage. The same kind of courage your great-grandfather had." Thomas couldn't speak. His throat was too tight. William made his decision. "I'm not going to press charges." The room erupted. Advisors began to protest. The security chief stepped forward. "Your Highness, with respect, we can't just..." William raised his hand. The room fell silent. "This man is not a criminal. He's a descendant trying to restore his family's honor. And more than that, he succeeded. Those gems are back where they belong. The debt, if there ever truly was one, has been paid." He looked at Thomas. "However, there are conditions." Thomas straightened. "Anything. First, this story will be made public. Not as a scandal, but as a historical correction. Captain James Hartley's name will be cleared in the official records. He will be remembered as the hero he was, not as a man under suspicion." Thomas's eyes widened. "You would do that?" "It's the truth," William said simply. "And truth matters." "Second," William continued, "you will work with the Royal Archives to document everything. Your great-grandfather's service. The events of that night. All of it. This is part of our history, and it should be preserved properly. Thomas nodded, tears streaming down his face now. Yes, yes, of course. William paused. I want you to attend a ceremony. 1 month from today. Here at the palace. Thomas looked confused. A ceremony. William's expression softened into something almost like a smile. You'll see. What happened next would shock the entire nation. News of Prince William's decision spread quickly, but the palace controlled the narrative carefully. The story wasn't about a break-in. It was about a decades-old mystery finally being solved. About a family's burden being lifted. About honor restored. The media response was explosive. Some praised William's compassion and wisdom. Others criticized him for being too lenient. But the public reaction was different. People were moved. Letters poured into the palace from families who had their own secrets, their own inherited shame. Thomas's story had touched something deep. Thomas returned to his apartment a free man, but everything had changed. He couldn't go back to his normal life, not yet. The weight that had been lifted from him felt strange, like he'd been carrying something so long he didn't know how to walk without it. He spent the next few weeks working with the royal historians. Together they pieced together Captain James Hartley's full story. They found more than anyone expected. Records showed that on the night of the bombing, Captain Hartley had been thrown from the transport truck by the blast. When he was found, he was unconscious, his coat torn and covered in debris. The gems must have fallen into his pocket during the chaos. It wasn't theft. It was an accident, pure and simple. They also found testimonies from other guards who had served with him. Every single one spoke of his integrity, his dedication, his unwavering loyalty to the crown. One letter, written by a fellow guard in 1943, stood out. James Hartley is the kind of man you want beside you in the darkest times. He doesn't think of himself, only of his duty. The royal family is safer because he exists. Thomas read that letter over and over. This was the man his family had been protecting all these years. This was the legacy they'd been afraid to lose. As the ceremony date approached, Thomas grew nervous. William hadn't told him what to expect, only that it would be important, that he should bring his mother and any other family members. Thomas's mother, Margaret, was overwhelmed by everything. She had grown up with the same secret, the same shame. When Thomas told her what William had done, she cried for an hour. Your grandfather would be so proud, she whispered. And your father? Oh, your father died hoping you could do this. And you did. The day of the ceremony arrived. Thomas wore his best suit. His mother wore a simple dress. They were driven to Kensington Palace in a car sent by the royal household. When they arrived, they were escorted to a private room. Thomas expected a small, quiet affair, perhaps a few words from William. A symbolic gesture, but when the doors opened to the main hall, Thomas stopped breathing. The room was filled with people. Not press. Not politicians. But veterans, historians, members of the royal guard, past and present. People who understood what this moment meant. At the front of the room stood Prince William. Beside him was a display case, and inside it, carefully arranged, were the 3 sapphire gems. But they weren't alone. Next to them was Captain James Hartley's military medal, his photograph, his service record. William stepped forward as Thomas and his mother walked down the aisle. The room was silent except for their footsteps. Thomas Hartley, William began, his voice carrying through the hall. You stand here today as the great-grandson of Captain James Hartley, a man who served this family and this nation with extraordinary courage during one of history's darkest periods. Thomas felt his mother's hand squeeze his. She was shaking. For 80 years, William continued, your family has carried a burden that was never theirs to bear. A mistake born from chaos. A secret kept not out of greed, but out of love for a man whose honor meant everything. He paused, looking directly at Thomas. Today, we correct the record. Today we honor not only Captain James Hartley, but every member of your family who protected his memory. William gestured to the display case. These gems were not stolen. They were caught in a moment of war and confusion. And while they have been missing from our collection, they were never truly lost. They were being kept safe by a family who understood their value not in money, but in meaning. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. "Captain James Hartley saved lives," William said. "He protected members of this family, including my great-grandmother. His service is recorded. His bravery is documented. But until today, his story was incomplete." William picked up a wooden box from the table beside him. He opened it, revealing something that made Thomas's heart stop. Inside was a medal, new but styled in the tradition of wartime honors. "Thomas Hartley," William said formally, "on behalf of the royal family, I present you with the Hartley Service Medal, created in honor of your great-grandfather, and in recognition of your family's 80-year dedication to protecting his legacy and ultimately making things right." Thomas couldn't move, couldn't speak. William continued. "This medal will be given annually to individuals who demonstrate extraordinary integrity in the face of impossible choices. People who, like your great-grandfather and like you, choose honor, even when it costs them everything." He held the medal out to Thomas. "Your great-grandfather's name is cleared. His service is celebrated. And your family story will be remembered not as a tale of shame, but as a testament to loyalty and love." Thomas stepped forward on shaking legs. He took the medal. The weight of it in his hands felt like vindication, like freedom. His mother was crying openly now. People in the crowd were wiping their eyes, but William wasn't finished yet. "There is one more thing," William said, his voice softer now. He turned to an aide, who brought forward an old leather journal. "When we researched your great-grandfather's service," William explained, "we found something in the archives that even you might not know about." Thomas looked at the journal, confused. William opened it carefully. "This is a personal diary kept by Princess Elizabeth during the war years. My great-grandmother. She rarely wrote about specific people, but there are 3 entries about Captain James Hartley." He turned to a marked page and began to read aloud. "February 14th, 1940. Today. Captain Hartley told me not to be afraid of the bombs. He said brave people feel fear too. They just don't let it stop them. I shall remember that." Thomas felt his throat tighten. William turned to another page. "August 3rd, 1940. The bombing was very close tonight. Captain Hartley stayed with us in the shelter. He sang songs to keep our spirits up. He has a terrible voice, but it made us laugh. Laughter feels like resistance." A few people in the crowd chuckled softly through their tears. William found the final entry. His voice grew quieter, more reverent. "March 10th, 1944. I learned today that Captain Hartley has died from injuries sustained in the line of duty. I am devastated. He was not just a guard. He was a friend. He made me believe that goodness still exists, even in war. I shall never forget him." The room was completely silent. Thomas's vision blurred with tears. William closed the journal. "Your great-grandfather meant something to this family, Thomas. He wasn't just a name in a file. He was real. He mattered. And now, because of you, the world will know the truth about who he really was." He placed the journal in Thomas's hands. "This is yours, a gift from one family to another." Thomas held the journal like it was made of glass. Inside were words written by a future queen about his great-grandfather, proof that James Hartley had been seen, had been valued, had been loved. Margaret stepped forward, her face wet with tears. William acknowledged her with a warm nod. "Mrs. Hartley," he said gently, "your father-in-law carried a burden he didn't deserve. Your husband carried it after him, and you carried it as well. That ends today. The Hartley name is restored, fully and completely." Margaret couldn't speak, but she nodded, pressing a handkerchief to her face. William turned back to the crowd. "Let this be a reminder to all of us. History is not simple. People are not simple. And sometimes the right thing to do is to look beyond what seems obvious and ask what really happened, to choose understanding over judgment." He looked at Thomas. "You could have sold those gems. You could have kept them hidden forever. But you didn't. You risked everything to do what you believed was right. That is the legacy of Captain James Hartley living on in you. The room erupted in applause. Not polite, formal clapping, but genuine, thunderous applause. Veterans stood. Historians stood. Even the stoic members of the Royal Guard were clapping with emotion on their faces. Thomas stood there, overwhelmed, clutching the medal and the journal. His mother beside him, finally free of the secret that had haunted her entire life. After the ceremony, people approached Thomas one by one. Veterans who had served in the same era as his great-grandfather, historians who wanted to include the story in official records, even some of the current Royal Guard members who shook his hand and told him they were proud to serve in the same tradition as Captain Hartley. One elderly man, former guard himself, pulled Thomas aside. "I met your great-grandfather once. Briefly, in 1942, I was new, barely 20. I made a mistake on patrol, and I thought I'd be dismissed. But Captain Hartley covered for me. He told me everyone makes mistakes, but good men learn from them." The old man's eyes were misty. He saved my career that day. Maybe my life, in a way. I never got to thank him, but I can thank you for making sure the world knows what kind of man he was. Thomas shook his hand, unable to form words as the crowd began to disperse. William approached Thomas and his mother one final time. "There's something else I want you to know," William said quietly. "Those sapphire gems? They're staying in the display case, right next to your great-grandfather's medal and photograph, permanently. This isn't just your family's history. It's ours too, and it deserves to be remembered." Margaret gasped softly. "Your Highness, that's—" "We don't know what to say. Say you'll visit," William said with a slight smile. "The display will be in the public section of the palace tour. People will see it. They'll learn the story, and they'll understand that honor isn't about being perfect. It's about doing right, even when it's hard." He extended his hand to Thomas. Not a formal handshake, but a genuine one. "Your great-grandfather would be proud of you. I hope you know that." Thomas shook his hand, tears streaming down his face. "Thank you. For everything. For believing me. For caring about the truth. Truth always matters," William said simply, "even when it takes 80 years to surface." As Thomas and his mother left the palace that day, they felt lighter than they had in their entire lives. The secret was gone. The shame was gone. What remained was pride. Pure, uncomplicated pride in a man who had served with honor, and a family who had protected his memory at great cost. But the story didn't end there. Something happened in the weeks that followed that no one could have predicted. The story of Thomas Hartley and the returned gems went viral. Not just in Britain, but around the world. News outlets covered it. Social media exploded with reactions. People were moved by the idea of a family carrying a secret for 80 years. And a prince who chose compassion over punishment, but something unexpected began to happen. Letters started arriving at the palace. Hundreds of them. Then thousands. They came from all over the world. From families with their own secrets, their own inherited guilt, their own stories of ancestors who had made mistakes or been caught in impossible situations. One letter came from a woman in France whose grandfather had been accused of desertion during World War II. She had documents proving he was actually captured and escaped, but had never known how to clear his name. Another came from a man in Australia whose great-uncle had been blamed for a workplace accident in the 1960s that wasn't his fault. The family had lived with the stigma for decades. The letters kept coming, each one a story of shame carried across generations. Each one looking for the same thing Thomas had found. A chance to set the record straight. Prince William read many of them personally. He was struck by how many people lived with inherited guilt. How many families were defined by one moment in history, often a moment that had been misunderstood or misrepresented. He made another decision, one that would become part of his legacy. He established the Hartley Truth Initiative, a program dedicated to helping families research and, when possible, correct historical injustices or misunderstandings. It wasn't about rewriting history, but about completing it. About finding the truth, whatever it might be. Thomas was asked to be part of it. To use his skills as a restoration specialist and his personal experience to help others. He accepted without hesitation. The first case they took on was a woman named Elena Rossi from Italy. Her grandmother had been accused of being a traitor during World War II for helping Allied soldiers. The family had been ostracized for generations. Thomas and the research team dug into wartime records. What they found was stunning. Elena's grandmother hadn't been a traitor at all. She had been a secret operative working with the Italian resistance. Her actions had saved dozens of lives. But the mission had been so classified that the truth had died with her. When Elena learned this, she collapsed in tears. Her grandmother, who she'd been told to be ashamed of, was actually a hero. The initiative cleared her grandmother's name. They held a ceremony in Rome. Historians updated their records. And Elena's family, like Thomas's, could finally hold their heads high. Case after case followed. Some were resolved with truth that brought honor. Others were more complicated, where the truth showed mistakes really had been made. But context provided understanding. Thomas found his calling in this work. Every family he helped felt like he was honoring his great-grandfather again. Captain James Hartley had protected the royal family. Now his great-grandson was protecting the truth for families everywhere. 6 months after the ceremony, Thomas returned to Kensington Palace. Not as someone seeking mercy, but as a guest. The display case with the sapphire gems and his great-grandfather's medal had become one of the most visited exhibits in the palace. Tour guides told the story daily. Children stood in front of the case, asking questions about courage and honesty. Adults stood there quietly, some wiping tears, each connecting the story to something in their own lives. Thomas watched from a distance as a young girl, maybe 8 years old, pointed at Captain Hartley's photograph. "Mummy," she said, "was he a good man?" Her mother read the plaque beside the display. "Yes, sweetheart. He was a very good man, and his family made sure everyone would know it." Thomas smiled. That was all he'd ever wanted. Later that day, he met with Prince William in a private office. They had become unlikely friends over the months, bonded by the shared mission of the initiative. "I've been thinking," William said, "about what you said that first day. About carrying weight for something you didn't do." Thomas nodded. "It consumed my whole life until recently." "I wonder how many people feel that way," William mused. "How many carry shame or guilt or fear because of what someone else did, or what they think someone did?" "It's too many," Thomas said quietly. "But we're helping. One family at a time." William looked at him seriously. "What you did was brave, Thomas. Coming into that vault, risking everything. But I think the braver thing was telling the truth. Standing in that interrogation room and refusing to hide anymore." Thomas considered this. "I didn't feel brave. One felt terrified. It's usually when real bravery happens," William said. "When you do the right thing, despite being terrified." He pulled out a folder. "I want to show you something." Inside was a photograph. Black and white, slightly faded. It showed Princess Elizabeth, young and serious, standing with a group of guards. And there, on her left side, was Captain James Hartley. "We found this in the archives last week," William said. "I thought you should have it." Thomas stared at the photograph. His great-grandfather looked so young, so proud, standing beside a future queen, ready to protect her with his life. "He really did matter to them," Thomas whispered. "He did," William confirmed. "And now everyone knows it." Thomas took the photograph carefully. Another piece of his great-grandfather's story. Another fragment of truth rescued from time as he left the palace that evening. Thomas thought about everything that had happened. How a desperate act in the middle of the night had turned into something bigger than he could have imagined. He thought about his father, who had died hoping for this resolution. His mother, who could finally speak the family name with pride. His great-grandfather, who had carried guilt to his grave for something that wasn't his fault. And he thought about all the families they were helping now. All the secrets being brought into light. All the truths being told. One decision. One moment of courage. One prince willing to listen. That's all it took to change everything, Thomas. Hartley walked through the palace gates as the sun set over London. In his pocket was the medal bearing his family name. In his hands was a photograph of a hero. And in his heart, finally, was peace. The burden had been lifted. The truth had been told. Captain James Hartley's name was clear, and in the end, honor had been restored. Not just for one man, but for a family. For a legacy. For everyone who had ever carried the weight of inherited shame and wondered if the truth would ever matter, it did matter. It always had. And thanks to one young man's courage and one prince's compassion, the world would remember that the gems had come home. But more importantly, so had the truth.